Greetings, fellow financial advisors and esteemed financial services leaders from across Canada. As senior advisors contemplate the future of their businesses and emerging advisors seek strategies to grow, there exists both a problem and an opportunity. Today, we aim to equip you with the tools and insights you need to successfully integrate books of businesses. Thanks for joining us and sharing some time in this important conversation. My name is Brent Chapman. I'm the founder of Advisor Flow and an independent financial advisor based in Vancouver on the West Coast. Before we dive into the topic today, let's familiarize ourselves with the functionalities of Zoom webinar. Throughout the session, please feel free to ask questions and we'll get to them as we move along. This session will be recorded and will be shared in the coming days, but we would encourage you to engage in the Q&A at the end of the event, as this will be an opportunity for us all to learn from each other. We at Advisor Flow value your feedback, and we always continually look to improve the quality of these events. At the end of the webinar today, we will be posing a question on our next webinar topic, so I'd encourage you to stick around and participate in that. Your participation is crucial in helping shape the future of these events, and we are firmly believing in the fact that we advisors working together will help create a better community for financial services and our clients. Technology has advanced dramatically throughout the pandemic, and this is helping to make administrative tasks easier for financial advisors. And that allows us to focus on providing high quality advice to our clients. We're fortunate to have two industry experts joining us today, George Hartman and Brent Swatuk, who have extensive experience in mentoring, coaching, and participating in book acquisitions. George Hartman boasts a 50-year career as a financial services professional. He's excelled as an advisor, executive, educator, commentator, coach, and consultant. George's accomplishments include building a successful advisory business, expanding assets for an investment management firm, and leading the national expansion of an advisory firm. I had the pleasure of being introduced to George by my friend Herman Chan, who I believe is on the call today. So thank you, Herman, for that and for leading our Advocates Tech and Innovation Committee. Our second speaker, Brent Swatuk, is the Vice President of Advisor Growth and Advanced Markets at the Griffin Advantage. With extensive expertise in the financial advisory business, Brent plays a pivotal role at Griffin, overseeing the strategy, advertising, and various financial services. With his profound understanding of complex business and clients, Brent empowers advisors like you and I to help them reach their full potential in their businesses. I personally have found Brent to be very thoughtful and humble as an industry leader, and I'm excited to learn from his experiences today as well. After Brent and George's prepared presentations, I'll discuss a little bit about how technology strategies between buyers and sellers can lead to better client retention and higher value transactions. Additionally, I'll be unveiling some features that Advisor Flow is rolling out this summer to assist MGAs, advisors, and dealerships in providing top-notch digital experiences. The remainder of this session will be an open Q&A where you can ask us all questions. Without further ado, I'll pass the floor over to Mr. George Hartman.
Well, thank you so much, Brendan, and it's a delight to be here at such a timely event collision in our industry in terms of both the demographics of the advisor population and the opportunities that creates for those who are going to carry on over the next 10, 15, or 20 years in the business. There is a tremendous amount of interest these days in buying and selling, of course, of books of business or businesses themselves. And in many ways, it's a very tempting market just because of the dynamics of it. I mean, you mentioned in the introduction, for example, that I just celebrated my 50th year in the industry last year, starting at the age of 6, by the way. And, you know, through the course of my career, certainly the first 20 years of it before I began my coaching and consulting practice, I built 3 books of business of my own. And in those days, you didn't sell them to anyone. You basically walked down the hall to somebody else that you trusted and ask them if they'd take care of your clients. And if they really appreciated the effort, then they might take you out for a nice dinner or buy you a good bottle of scotch or something. But today, with books of business trading hands in the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in many cases, a significant market has grown up around it. And with that market excitement, have a lot of different opinions have been developed about the wisdom, in fact, of building a business through the acquisition of other books of business. It is definitely a way to leapfrog your business ahead versus trying to grow it organically. But the question that I would hope to answer for you today, or at least get you to think about, is it always the best course of action for building your practice? So I want to introduce some element of caution, I guess, into the conversation and give you some food for thought as to whether or not this makes particular sense to you. So my comment will be largely at a high level, and then certainly Brent and Brendan can add some detail more around the mechanics, although I'm sure, in fact, I know there's going to be some overlap in what we talk about. So a couple of things just to position this before we actually get into it. In today's world, we are in a seller's market. There are a lot more buyers of books of business out there than there are people willing to sell. As a coach and consultant, I constantly get people asking me if I know of books of business that are for sale. I'd say the ratio could be as high as 50 to 1, 50 buyers for every book of business that comes on the market. So that means that if you are looking to acquire a book of business to augment your own practice today, you need to position yourself as the buyer of choice. And that's a whole other topic as to how you do that. But let's recognize that it is a very competitive market out there. So how are we going to decide? Well, I think the first thing to do is to figure out what it is you are trying to accomplish by acquiring a book of business to leapfrog your business ahead. Are you looking just to bulk up your practice in some way, or are you looking to augment a business plan that you might already have in place? And if we could switch to the next slide, please, Brendan. To me, the whole issue begins with your vision for your business. I'm a big believer in Stephen Covey's habit number 2 from that 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, where he says, begin with the end in mind. And through 30 years of coaching, I've found that to be a very successful approach. And so one of the questions I often ask our coaching clients when we first engage is, tell me your definition of success, because everyone does define success in their own way. For some people, it's measured by revenue or assets under management, premium, in-force, number of types of clients, or it could be measured by things like the work-life balance that they are trying to achieve, or the extent to which they want to be involved in other activities, philanthropy, and so on. And so the question I always ask is, what will your practice look like when it is as successful as you want it to be? And if we can have people articulate that, be thoughtful about how they come to that description, with that definition of success, then we can begin to map out a strategy and employ the tactics that will help us achieve that success. So next slide, please, Brendan. No, and one more. If I may say, your vision statement has to answer a number of questions, and we can just flip down these, Brendan. How big do I want to become? What am I going to be doing in that role? What am I offer? What's my value proposition going to be? What type of clients am I going to have? How do I define them? Who's be on my team? What's the level of service we're going to provide? And what's it going to look and feel like to be a client of ours or even a member of our team? And very importantly, what brand do we want to have out in the community? One of the challenges that we have, of course, as advisors today is that the consumers do not differentiate very much among financial advisors. To them, many of us all look the same and sound the same, make the same promises, and so on. So we do need to build a brand. And whatever makeup you have of your practice would be a differentiating or a distinguishing factor that will be important. And that's why I think it's absolutely essential that you have a good vision of what you are trying to accomplish, and that everything you do is consistent to achieving that objective. And we have a sample vision statement here, if we could just pop that up. So here's one this is an actual one that we created along with one of our clients. In 5 years, we will be the go-to firm for high net worth individuals and their advisors. We'll be reputation as experts in wealth management, selective about the clients we accept, adding only a few per year so we can apply our unique knowledge and systems. 2 to 3 partners, ensemble of talents. So financial people and planning people, investment people, insurance people, and so on. No more than 200 clients, $2 million of revenue, 70% recurring. A support team of people who share a passion for excellence. They have latitude in how they do their work and so on. My personal role will be rainmaker and managing relationships for the top clients. Now, the reason I put this up there, not to suggest this should be anyone's vision of their business, is because if I am this person writing this and I'm contemplating growing my business through leaps and bounds by acquiring other books of business, I have to do it within the context of this vision. So, for example, in 5 years, we want to be the go-to firm for high net worth individuals. Well, if I'm out looking for a book to acquire, one, with all respect, for example, to school teachers, is unlikely to fit this vision, not because, school teachers are not worthy clients in any regard. It's just that they are unlikely to be high net worth individuals who rely on other professional advisors. And the full wealth management range of services may not be important to them. If we're only going to add a few clients per year, then we need to ensure there's an economic reason for adding those clients, which typically means higher net worth clients, more sophisticated or complicated planning needs, and so on. So all the way down, and again, I won't run through the whole thing, but it is important that if you've cemented this vision, then you can look. It makes it so much easier to look at potential acquisitions in the context of having a clear definition of the type of business that you want to build. Okay, next slide, please, Brendan. As a result of this, and I mentioned that I've built a bunch of books of business in my career, but there were no rules back then. There were no, as I said, not only were people not buying or selling practices, but generally it was not a carefully thought out process. And as a consequence, in the absence of that experience and some guidance, a number of myths or misinformation or mistakes have occurred with respect to the acquisition of books of business. And I'll just highlight a couple of them if we can jump to the next slide, Brendan. And that is the difference between, one of them is the difference between buying a book of business and buying a business. And we often use those terms interchangeably, and I even do in my own work, but there is a significant difference. A book of business is essentially a client list. Now, we have expectations about what will happen with that client list, but basically, that is all we are acquiring. In the book of business, the client list is, in fact, of course, the biggest asset in most practices, but it's not one that shows up on the balance sheet. It shows up on the income statement, obviously, through the revenue that is generated from those clients. But that's what a book of business is. And let's accept that that's what it is a client list. Buying a business, on the other hand, means acquiring much more than just the client list. Of course, you get the client list, but you also get the brand, the reputation, the systems, the momentum of the business, the reputation. Sometimes you get staff, and even in some cases, you get real estate and other fixtures and equipment and so on. So again, it's important to differentiate what it is that you are looking for. If you just want to add to the client list, then a book of business is fine. If you are looking to accelerate and expand the profile and the reputation of your own firm, then perhaps a business acquisition of a business would be more appropriate. So again, it goes back to the question of vision. What fits best into what you are trying to accomplish? Acquiring a business or acquiring a book of business? And the next slide, please. I mentioned the myths, and here's one that's coming up. Although we're in a seller's market today, we obviously have an aging advisor population. And within the next 5 to 10 years, it's estimated that somewhere around 40% of veteran advisors will be exiting the business for their own retirement. And whether that's voluntarily or not, it is a movement that is underway. However, and one would expect as a result of that, of course, that more and more businesses or books of business will come on the market, giving us much more choice. However, from my experience, I can tell you as a coach and as someone who's probably been on the side of several hundred business transitions over the past few years, a lot of the practices or books of business that are going to be offered for sale simply are probably not worth buying. For many reasons. Often they're old and tired and have been neglected, and it would require a tremendous amount of work to reinvigorate them and make them worthwhile additions to your own business. In other cases, as I mentioned, there may not be the fit there. And I think the simple way to test this is to simply ask yourself, would you buy just any practice or book of business? And I believe the answer to that would be no. You would obviously want to have some criteria, some profile that you would develop that would that would disqualify some business and move others to the front of the line in terms of potential acquisitions. So this is a very big one, as I said, very tempting. And I think the opportunity to acquire books of business will accelerate over the next few years. I would just caution you to make sure that you are looking at the right opportunity in terms of what your broader term objective is. And next, please, Brendan. And the other thing I want to emphasize here is price. Again, in the absence of some formal valuation process that's fairly standardized across all acquisitions or transitions of books of business, a bunch of rules have grown up. Things like practices always sell for some multiple of revenue, or percentage of assets under management, or percentage of in-force, or something like that. We do valuations. We do quite a few of them in the course of a year. And I can tell you, it doesn't really matter what value we put on a piece of paper for a practice. At the end of the day, unless the buyer and seller agree, we don't have a deal. So our estimate of value is a guideline for people to perhaps begin negotiations. But at the end of the day, driven by the motivation of the buyer and the seller, people will decide whether or not a transaction is going to take place. But what that does raise the question is there anything about your business that would make it worth more or less than others? And in the context of what we're talking about today, is there anything about a book of business or a practice that you may be looking to acquire that would give it a premium or a discount valuation? And buyers in today's world are becoming far more diligent. They're looking much more carefully and much more deeply into books of business that they might be thinking of acquiring, to see if there is an opportunity either to acquire a premium practice at a good price, or to discount a price and then find a practice that we can then enhance through our own efforts. Okay, next one, please, Brendan. And so beware. All these rules of thumbs that have popped up, as I said, 3 times EBITDA. Now, that would be probably a useful one if advisors calculated the EBITDA in their practice. But again, I can tell you, in most instances, advisors do not separate out profitability, which is what EBITDA represents from revenue. So 1 to 3 times trailing revenue is important. 3 to 5 times recurring revenue versus non-recurring. You can see recurring revenue is worth approximately $3 to 1 for non-recurring. Some percentage of assets under management if it's an investment book. The challenge with all of these is that they make the assumption that all practices or books of business are created equal. And of course, they are not. That would be like saying all the houses of the same size on a street should sell for the same price. And we know that's not true. Some homeowners do a better job of upgrading their homes and increasing their value, while others neglect them and the value declines. The same thing with books of business or practices themselves. And the next point, please. Each one of these books of business that you would look at has something in it, multiple opportunities or multiple factors that could affect its value. And they range all the way from the age of clients to the tenure of your staff, to the mix of products and services that you offer, and so on. Some of the things that I believe Brent is going to talk about later on. And most importantly, please be cautious of what I describe as stories on the street. And these are the ones, old Joe down the road, he sold his book for 2x. My book is so much better than his, it must be worth 3x. All right. And you'll hear this from sellers all the time. All right. And you need to dig deep into that and see if there is, in fact, something in a book that you might be looking at that warrants either a premium, as I said, or a discounted price. Don't be caught up in someone's self evaluation of the value of their business or book of business. All right, so just to dig a little deeper into this on a more formal basis, the next slide, please. Brent, this is basically a summary of my message. Think about the acquisition in terms of how it fits into your vision. The core, the yellow ball in the middle of this diagram, of course, represents the vision. And it's basically, what is it that you are trying to achieve broadly in your practice, and then secondarily by acquiring a book of business to add to your existing practice. So an example might be, my vision is to build a highly regarded, sustainable practice with maximum value in 10 years. All right, so that might be your vision. Now, what vision does is it determines strategy and tactics. And unfortunately, the slide is in error here. Strategy should actually be the second layer in where I have tactics. I reversed them, and my apologies. But vision determines strategy. So we know what it is we're trying to accomplish. Now, more specifically, what is the objective? In this case, to grow my business to $1 million of revenue within 10 years might be a stated strategy. Strategy then determines tactics. Pardon me. How am I going to accomplish that objective? I might make the decision 50% through acquisition of other books of business and 50% through organic growth. And then finally, vision determines strategy, sets strategy, which determines the tactics, which identify the activities that you are going to use to continue to grow that business through acquisition. So what tools and resources do you have? What do you need? Which ones can you acquire? And so on. Build a practice profile, a target practice profile, which will then lead to a target book, acquisition book, and then a marketing plan around achieving that objective. So it's a continuum. And in fact, it can be a circular continuum, because once you've done it once, and I do know advisors who've acquired 5, 6, 7, 8 books of business over their careers and are building very successful practices as a result, but they've been very thoughtful about the practices that they considered, and they've always been within the context of a higher level vision. So that's my caution. Be thoughtful about this. Take your time. Don't be tempted. It's very tempting because there's such competition right now for, if you see a practice that comes up on the market, to want to jump and grab it. I'd suggest that might be a mistake. And let me give you one very specific example before I hand this off to Brent. We were working with an advisor who acquired approximately 100 clients through an acquisition. And it looked like a great opportunity. They were good clients. The cash flow and everything made sense to him. He had an internal policy that every one of his clients had to receive a full financial plan before he made any product recommendations to them. So guess what? He had then set himself up to do 100 financial plans before he could fully completed the acquisition or transition. It took him over a year to complete those 100 plans and move that business forward. So again, that's what I mean about thinking about it within the context of the broader vision you have for your business. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my friend Brent.
Thanks, George. Appreciate that. Brandon, we can jump right into the slides. And it's always interesting. George, I love your presentation, by the way. And it's funny how it integrates very well into mine. And it was nice because I thought you'd probably dive into some stuff. And so mine will hit it high level, and then we'll talk about a few things and then turn it over to Brandon. So assessing the block, there are businesses out there, as George was mentioning, and just as George was saying, you've got to determine whether you want, whether those blocks make sense for you to purchase or not. So I'm just going to move something out of the way here so I can see my slides. So I think there's more investment blocks that are available out there currently than what I see life insurance. And some of the life insurance blocks that are coming up is because the practitioners passed away. You've got to make a determination. You've got a widow on one side. And so you've really got to make sure that that's going to integrate well with what it is that you're looking to build. Yes, there's lots of rule of thumbs. So just as George mentioned, there's all these formulas that you're going to look at. The standard rule of thumb that we've always heard of is 2 times in-force renewals. But just as George was saying, you evaluate the block in a multitude of different ways. So I'm going to speak mostly to evaluating a life insurance block in this moment. But obviously, we'd provide the same thoughtful approach, whether we were looking at a group insurance block, whether we were looking at an investment block, then making sure that it fits. So things that would add or reduce to the price of a life insurance block. So if we're looking at a block, if it's mostly younger ages and there's a large term bank there, then to me that's a real advantage, right? So depending, of course, on what your practice is, I'd certainly, when we evaluate a block and we're saying, hey, we're going to pay this times multiple, and maybe there's a premium because there's this much ongoing revenue that usually happens on an ongoing basis, but there's a massive amount of term insurance there. That represents a lot of opportunity to go out and have conversations with these folks. So as long as they fit your practice dynamics, that adds to what we would pay for a book of business. Obviously, if there are a lot of older ages and there's a big term bank in the older ages, that kind of goes against. So younger age is good, older age is not so good. Who doesn't love a good whole life block? Well, you've got to evaluate it, because if somebody says they sold a lot of whole life, well, what did they sell? Did they sell a lot of limited pay? And it's like, they're at that 15-year cycle onto a 20 pay, and the renewals are about to cut out in 5 years. You don't want to pay a lot of money for that. And if they're older clients, obviously too, it might be a whole life block, and there may not be a lot of service, and it might provide good ongoing revenue. But once again, we're going to have an older client. We're going to have more just service, and maybe the client's passing away. Maybe it leads to other offshoot sales that fits really nicely into your practice. But to me, those two things would take away from the value, right? Because that's a lot of service work, maybe not a lot of recurring revenue, like just more than just the ongoing trailers for recurring revenue. DI blocks, younger is obviously better than older, right? CI block, once again, term, younger, better. Older policies with ROP starts to become, once again, a little problematic for if you're going to purchase this, because we know that those renewals are going to come off the block. So the good thing about DI and CI is we know that typically once this stuff sells, it stays on. But the younger the clientele is, the better this is going to be for when you're evaluating and you want to look at it from an opportunity perspective. That's going to be a lot better for you. UL is always problematic. That's why I kind of put it at the end. So a lot of contracts, whether it's level cost, which isn't as problematic as some of the others, when it's level or limited pay, a lot of times there isn't any, I put in-force, but what I meant to say there was trailer, right? So ongoing service fees for you, there isn't a lot. There are some contracts out there that do have lifetime service fees, but a lot of them don't. And so you may be buying a block that just has a bunch of service and not a lot of ongoing revenue for. And YRT is almost always problematic. So unless it was sold on guarantees, okay, maybe that's great. But if it's YRT and it's a lot of that equity-based stuff, we've seen so much of that stuff blow up. And that's just, all you're doing is putting service work into your future and not a lot of selling time into your future. So you've really got to evaluate whether those are problems that you really want to take on to your business, because it really goes down to this, right? So when we're just looking at the block on the outside, that's one thing. But as George drove through, and I was hoping he'd spend a lot of time on vision of the business, does acquiring this block accelerate you to getting to your personal goal line, right? So everybody has to have a goal line. Some people want to be top of the table. Some people want to make it work, 2 days a week and make 80 grand. And there's nothing wrong with either side of that. So, once we know what the big vision of that business is, does acquiring this block of business accelerate us to that goal line, or does it create a lot of distractions, right? Because if we've got a lot of service work and it doesn't allow us to actually be in our greatness, right? It doesn't allow us to show up for clients and be that rainmaker and bringing in, then it may not be worth the acquisition. We got to think of, do you have a target audience or ideal client profile? This also fits into our vision, of course. But once we narrow that out and we know that, listen, target audience, ideal client profile, that's been big over the last 20 years. It should have been big all along, but it's really starting to come into place. And a lot of generalists out there will thumb their nose at this. But if you're building a practice, you want to know who you do your best work with. And obviously we want to make sure that if we're buying a book of business, what's the percentage of that business that actually fits into your ideal client? Like, who does does the book actually fit? Does your process fit? And can you help these people get to the finish line? Can you help them get to their goals? Does it keep you focused? Are you going to be like a laser beam, or are you just going to be like a light just shining on stuff? So we gotta narrow all of that down. The next thing is teaming. Do you have a team? If we look at your practice, we want to know, if you have a team, because a certain percentage of the book may fit your target audience and where you want to spend your time. And if that's the case and you have built out a team, then some of that book may proliferate down and be handled by other team members. And maybe some of it will be handled just by the internal staff, because we know it's mostly going to be service and we're just buying that for the ongoing lifetime renewals. So we want to take a look at it very thoughtfully and make sure that, we're keeping ourselves into what we want to build and we're working within our greatness. But then too, if we have a team, and teaming is becoming so much bigger here in Canada than what it has been in the past. And so if that's the case, how are we going to spread that down? And remember, there's two sides of this deal, as George mentioned. So the selling advisor is probably going to want to understand this. Now, if you're buying a book of business because the person has passed away, maybe the spouse isn't going to care about this. But if you're buying a book of business where somebody has taken a lot of care and time in curating their clients and helping them define down what they're trying to build and building out those plans and tracking and measuring them, they're going to want to understand you, what your values are, what your practice is about, and then they're going to want to know the strategy for book integration. And there might be retention there with them. I was working on a case or a practice. We're looking at transitioning a practice from one advisor to another just in the last week. And what we're looking at is a retention deal for the original business owner, right? So his big thing is he loves to be out and meeting with clients and attracting clients. He just doesn't want to actually do the actual physical work, the planning work. And so we may be able to create a scenario here where they can continue to play the role of rainmaker and still generate revenue and do the parts of the practice that they want to do. But we create a team so that way there's someone there to do the actual planning work and someone there to do the service work. And we don't have to lose, that advocate. We don't have to lose that rainmaker. So, all these things taken into account when we're taking a look at a book. Brandon, go to the next page, please. And then, strategy, plans, goals. When we buy this book about business, how are we going to buy it? If I'm the guy selling it, I'd like an all cash purchase with no retention. But that probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense in your world. And you may not have the cash to do so, depending on how big that practice is. So, how's it going to be bought? Is it going to be financed? Is it going to be, are we going to do I have so much money and I put so much down and then we'll finance the rest out with the bank? Am I going to just finance it all in one go? Am I going to structure it? So is it a 2-year retention clause that we're going to put into it? We need to know exactly the details of that. We may be using a bank if we can find a bank that will go with our valuations on that. And there's certain MGAs out there that will help you in financing the book of business. I happen to work at a firm, Griffin, that is something that we do with our advisors, is we will help them finance those books of businesses, when it makes sense, of course. The other option is vendor take back. So we have the individual that's checked you out, likes your practice. They're going to take a down payment, but they're going to actually finance you and take that out over the 5-year period and whatnot. And if you obviously default or things don't go well, they have the ability to take that back. So number of different ways that we're going to buy that block of business, but you need to know how you're going to do that. And your person that's selling you the book of business is obviously going to be very interested in that. But once we get it, by the way, there's some compliance things that we need to go through too. So, when we're onboarding those folks into our firm or we're going into theirs, we need to make sure that all the clients are contacted within a finite period. And so we need to figure out what that means. Are we going to do phone calls, emails, texts? What we don't want is a client coming in and saying, you never contacted me and this happened, right? The policy lapsed or the market declined and I never heard from your firm, because that's a liability nightmare. So we do want to make sure that, all clients are contacted within a specific period of time. just to make sure we're making contact with them, right? And we want to make sure we're papering our files so that way we're on side with compliance. The other thing too is you want to meet with all the clients to make sure that the coverage is still in good standing, that the beneficiaries are correct. Never been more important to go out and do beneficiary reviews than right now. The other thing too is making sure that products meet their requirements. I was actually across town today on somebody that just acquired a new client, and the products they had were not meeting their requirements. And so, that presents an opportunity. The other thing too is, we want to do all this within a certain amount of time. So we want to make sure that all this is done within 6 months, 1 year, that we've met with all the clients, that the files are all updated, that we've got brand new AML, that we've got, brand new, we've got anti-spam, that we've got a know your client in there, that we've got all of our compliance papers all in line so that way our files in good standing. And we all have to do this because, well, number one, because we need to do it. But number two, it's just really good practice for us. And none of us want to buy a book of business and then end up having to overspend on defending our actions or defending our lack of action with those clients, right? That kind of defeats the purpose on trying to accelerate the growth of our practice if we're going to leave ourselves exposed. So just kind of a wrap up and a where to start. If you haven't done it, create your vision, know what you're trying to build, right? Define your mission or your crusade, whatever you like. Figure out who your ideal client is. If you have issues with this, I do have some materials on defining the ideal client. I'm happy to share that stuff back with folks. You can reach out to Brandon or reach out directly to me if we're connected. But happy to lend out some of my material to help you define down your ideal client and think of them thoughtfully in different stages of their life. But very, very important to know who you do your best work with and who you're trying to attract. Because then too, when we're evaluating books of business, we know whether that's going to fit our practice or not. Because if you buy a practice and it doesn't fit yours, you could just be like spinning your wheels, creating new processes, creating lots of service work. And it's really going to detract you from hitting your goal line. And that's really not the idea behind all of this. If you don't have your process defined, and I mean all your processes in your business, you definitely do not go buy a book of business if your process is not down tight. If you don't have your team working well in your current practice, adding another practice to yours just adds a whole lot of confusion and frustration, and it's going to be a really bad undertaking for you. If you don't have this set and you want to get started somewhere, I always like to use Harry Hoopus, was the one who referred this book to me. The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. I've talked to many advisors on this. I've talked to many different business owner friends of mine on this. And when you're looking to scale your business and you're looking to stop just running an incorporated practice, but you want to convert into a business, this book is just a great reference place for you to start on mapping out your business so you can be working as a business owner and rainmaker versus being the person that's, imagine going into a McDonald's and the person that you place your order with also runs back and flips your burgers, also, puts it in the bag and hands it back over to you. It doesn't happen. And if you're running your practice that way, adding more clients to it doesn't make it run smoother. It makes everything much more complex. So once we have those things down, it's business plan, as George said, it's marketing plan. And yes, marketing plan is very different to business plan, folks. And depending on what you're doing, you want to know your metrics because there's no point in spending $1 in marketing if you don't know if you're making more than $1 in return. And if you're going dollar out and dollar in, that's not really good marketing. And if you're going dollar out and less than dollar in, well, that's just throwing away money, folks. So the better your ideal client profile is, the better your marketing plan is going to be. Trust me on that one. I've gone down far too many rabbit holes. The next thing is these are actually reversed. Usually you get a mentor and then a coach. I've had lots of mentors in my early careers, and thank God for them. And then I had really great coaches along the way too. So very important for you to get good mentoring and coaching and people that have not only done what you're doing, but maybe even from outside industry. So I have a lot of my stuff comes from outside influences, and there's just great crossover. The next thing is get with a great organization. So great MGA, great dealer. great brokerage that can help you. AYB is a Griffin term, but advantage your business. And what that means is they are going to provide you not only with conduit to put your business through, but also that they know your business and they're looking for ways for you to accelerate your business, and they're bringing those buying opportunities together for you. And honestly, buying a business is great, but you need to evaluate whether you're going to build or buy. Buying comes with its inherent service issues. It comes with like stickiness and ugliness and that. Building, you know what you're building. That comes with its inherent issues of having to build and scale and find clients, but both come with its advantages and disadvantages, and you have to decide which of the two works better for you and who you want to add. And then have an integration strategy with marketing plans. So, when we're looking at a book, it's not just about, hey, the renewals will pay this off. I was just talking to an advisor about 3 weeks ago on this. He's just bought a new book of business, but he's got a full integration strategy and marketing plan to get him from the red to the black as fast as possible. And this is his second block purchase. And the first one, they had a 5-year plan with it to pay back or to pay off all the debt on acquiring that book. And his metrics show that they did that in just over 3 years. And so you want to make sure that you have a thoughtful strategy, because you want to get from the red to the black as fast as possible. So that way you're not financing anything, and that's just all net revenues to your bottom line. And Brandon, I turn it over to you, sir.
Thanks a lot, Brent. You have a very unique perspective here on the MGA side. And I know we've got folks that do investments and insurance on the call. So hopefully both sides of the coin are getting value from our talk today. I see we've got some good questions that have come in, and we'll get to those in just a minute here. All right. So we've had George talk about practice management with regards to buying a book of business. We've had Brent talk about risks and compliance and things to think about, and definitely a little bit of overlap. What I'm going to talk about is how you can leverage technology to increase the value of a block when it's being sold, and how you can increase the likelihood clients stick around during the transition. And I'll share some personal experiences here, and I'm definitely still a student of the industry. I see Jeremiah's on the call. Thanks for that term. I'm always trying to learn, and I think that's why you're all here today. Now, about 4 years ago, I met a senior advisor, and I built my business over the course of 8 years. I found a niche, and I focus on a particular niche of tech clients. Now, the senior advisor, when I met with him, he mentioned at some point he did plan to retire at some point. Not all advisors do plan to retire, but this one said he was planning to. Now, over time, I learned that he only had paper files, and he was very focused on the client relationships. And he had a very unique way of building those planning engagements and keeping his clients engaged long-term, some of which he'd had for over 30 years, or he still has today. So what I saw here is a potential opportunity for us to work together. I wanted to learn how he could retain clients for 35, 40 years and build a practice as successful as he had. He wanted to make sure he had a good succession plan that would allow his clients to be taken care of by someone that cared just as much as he did. So what we did is we looked at some of the softwares that I was using in my business and started to integrate them into his business. My team ended up helping him digitize his files. We use a platform called Sync. And he also set up an advisor flow subscription. So the reason for that is as he's re-engaging some of his clients, he's then able to send a financial overview survey and have them update information within the platform. When the clients end up coming over, it's going to mean a much smoother process because his clients are already used to some of the processes that I'm integrating in my business, but we'll be sharing his experience and my experience and blending the two together. We're now looking to integrate a mutual CRM so that the data can be easily integrated as the transition occurs. We're also doing a joint event. We're inviting some of his clients and some of mine. And the intent here is to further bridge the relationships. So my whole point with this is that I was willing to pay more for his book of business because he was willing to work with me on this. And I'm in no rush to buy books of business because I am obviously organically growing my practice. And I think for all advisors on the call, you should think the same way. You don't necessarily just come across a book of business for sale. It's generally a relationship that evolves over time. George talked about your buddy down the hall. That still might be the case. It could be somebody who you've known for years that ends up wanting to work with you because there's that degree of trust and they know that you're a competent professional that'll offer them the same experience that they've been used to, or perhaps even a slightly better one if you want to integrate more technology. Okay, so at our last webinar, we discussed some upcoming features for Advisor Flow, such as team collaboration and survey sharing, as well as French language functionality. These are all slated to be released next month, and I would encourage anyone who's currently using the platform, please provide us with some feedback. We also have a refer a friend feature within your advisor details page. So if you are enjoying the platform, please do share it. Don't keep it a secret. The more advisors that leverage the platform and provide feedback, the better the platform gets for all of us. Okay, so we're going to move into Q&A before wrapping up. So I'm going to invite George and Brent back for that. And we've got a few that have already come in the chat. Welcome back, gents.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so for first one, will you receive a copy of the presentation? Yes, if you registered, you will get a copy. Another question that came in, what are some reasons older advisors don't have a successor and perhaps haven't started the process yet? I'll kick that over to either of you.
I can jump in on that one pretty quickly because we run into it all the time. There are basically two dimensions to the decision to exit your business. One's financial and the second is emotional. And the financial part often surprises people. When you actually get down to doing your own financial plan in a serious way, and you discover that despite having provided great advice to your clients over the years, you've not done as good a job accumulating wealth for yourself as you have for them. And so they're counting on the sale of their practice to fund part of their retirement lifestyle. And when people do the calculation, right down to the after-tax value that they get out of a transition, sometimes they hesitate or in fact decide they can never retire. We get that quite frequently. The second and actually more difficult one, the bigger challenge, is the emotional aspect of walking away from a business that you spent 25 or 30 years building. Many of your clients have become friends. You're proud of the work that you've done. The community respects you. Your ego is well fed and all of those things. And that's just hard to give up. So yeah, increasingly, we started coaching advisors on succession planning in a serious way 10 years ago. It was a struggle to get them to talk about it. Now, as they're getting older and they realize they're not immortal, that probably we're getting I'd say probably for sure, we're getting a much higher level of interest in actually planning for succession. So if you're looking to acquire, you're looking to be the successor in there, recognize those two dimensions, financial and emotional, and speak to them and put yourself in a position where you become the preferred candidate because you understand the dilemma that the seller is going through.
I think you hit that pretty well, George. But anything you want to add, Brent?
No, I think it's perfect. I mean, honestly, from a son of a father who retired out of the business, I can tell you the financial was one thing. Fortunately, he was in a very good position financially that it made sense. But the biggest one was I remember asking him, and listen, if you get this from your son, you're going to discount it every day of the week. But I said to him, I go, like from a psychological level, who are you the day after you retire? Because up until now, there's been a very blurry line. There's been no work-life balance. There's been pure work-life integration. Like, who are you tomorrow after you retire? And that's always a very interesting question. It's also even with our clients, sometimes the way they thought while they were in accumulation phase shifts dramatically to when they go in the accumulation phase. So accumulating, they're like, hey, go to school, get good grades, save well, because we're going to spend it all. And then they get into retirement. All of a sudden, they're like, hey, we locked some money up into GIC prison. So the psychological, piece that George is mentioning is a very, very big piece. And you couple that with a lot of folks that were great at fixing other people's cars, but maybe not fixing their own, that can be a problem.
And the next question that builds off this, what are potential sellers really looking for when they choose a buyer?
So I'll jump on that one. George started the last one. In my perspective, number one, they want to know, they want to get to know you personally. They want to know, like George said, a lot of these folks become friends. Some of them are family. Like, let's face it, everybody that starts out pretty much gets hammered with Project 100, right? So a lot of your core people are friends and family. And so, you've built off of that. You've built a really successful practice and you really like your clients. It's very rare that you meet somebody that's made it a long time where they're like, I hate all my clients. I don't care who I sell them to. It's a very personal matter for you who's built the practice. It's a personal matter for them because it's their that 1/3 of their life they're going to need to go. It's that keeping the business in the family. And so they want to make sure that you're of the same quality, you share the same values, that, it's nice too if they feel like they're getting a step, if the clients are getting a step up, that your level of service and your process is actually better than what theirs is. Usually you're not going to find somebody saying, hey, you will find some out there, unfortunately, that say, hey, I think I can squeak more dollars by selling to this guy, but everybody's going to get hosed along the way. That's not usually the type of guys we want to engage with anyways. So, I think they're looking for common values and a good quality service and team there that can actually take those clients and help get them to the promised land that they've made the promises on.
Just a quick add on to that. One of the questions we always ask someone who's contemplating which successor to choose is, are you going to leave your own money there for them to manage? And if they say, no, I'm not confident enough to do that, then they've got the wrong choice. But if you as a buyer can position yourself as someone that they would want as their advisor, then you've done a pretty good job of finding the right match.
Like that. And for some of our emerging advisors, where and when should they start looking for buyers? And is there good places they can spend time? What's your guys' opinion on that? Do they all hang out at the same bar?
Well, I mean, listen, I think your brokerage is if you have a good relationship with your dealer, or do you have a good relationship with your MGA, those are great places. Yes, I think we all can't remember the name of the firm, but we all get an email saying, hey, we got an advisor team with, $1 million, $2 million, $100 million in assets, and looking to make an exit from their business. But a lot of times it's going to be conferences. It's going to be, does your MGA know somebody that's retiring out? Is there a friend that knows somebody that's retiring out? And there seems to be that commonality. To me, that's probably a good place. George, you might have some other, coaching, knowing coaches probably helps too, because somebody gets to the end. But
yeah, this has to be, if you're a buyer, you want to be a buyer, you have to approach this in a very serious manner because of the competition out there for books of business. So you have to have a formal marketing plan. I call it a book acquisition plan rather than a client acquisition plan. And that means, creating your own story that tells in a compelling way why you would be the best candidate. It also means deciding how you're going to communicate that you're looking for a book of business out to the people who might be able to make that introduction. So that means talk to everybody that you can, everybody in your firm, everybody, the down the hall, all the product representatives that come in, anybody, coaches, mentors, anybody that you can think of that might have an influence over somebody else in the marketplace. But tell your story in that compelling way and approach it as it's not something that's likely to happen in 30 days, 60 days, 6 months, 12 months. So it could take you years, in fact, to find the right match and to be positioned as the ideal candidate. So approach it seriously in a very disciplined way.
I like that. Yeah, and it doesn't happen overnight. Now, we've got a number of other good questions. Before I continue, I just want to throw up the poll for our next webinar topic. So this is literally how we came across this topic, and I sourced out the best I could find, which was George and Brent. So for those who've joined today, hopefully you've appreciated that. Everybody should have a poll that's popped up on their screen. If you don't mind, if you had to choose between content marketing, growing a multi-advisor team, or responsible investments, which topic do you find would benefit your practice most? And then I'll do my best to find the best people out there to speak on the topic. Okay, looks pretty close between content marketing, and growing a multi-advisor team. Awesome. Yeah, pretty close. I guess I have to do both of those in the next 6 months then. Awesome. Thanks everybody for sharing. Let's continue with the questions. Now, for those that have to leave right at the top of the hour, I do just want to share the contact info of Brent and George in case anybody wants to speak with them. So I'll share that really quick, and then we'll continue with the Q&A. So if you have feedback on this event, everyone will get an email afterwards. So please do reply to that email, share with us your thoughts. If you want to check out Advisor Flow and book a demo, please do that. Learn more about George's practice and how he helps advisors supercharge their business, marketlogix.ca. Brent, very active on LinkedIn and Facebook. Please add him. And if you're new to Advisor Flow, you can use the June webinar discount code until the end of the month, and you'll get a discount on your subscription. Okay, let's get back into the Q&A. An advisor's saying they're buying a block. They're looking at getting about 3 times multiple for the entire block. It includes lots of lives, some group, and they're saying, well, maybe the life insurance should be worth a bit less. What's your guys' opinion on that?
I think, Brent, you're well positioned to deal with that one.
And it's funny because group was always fairly static between 2 and 4 times renewals, and then there was a firm that was out buying them at 7 times, like in the last couple. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they were doing like 7 times, and that kind of threw a whole bunch of stuff in a bit of a tailspin there. The life insurance needs to be evaluated. I think once again, those factors where, if they really fit your market, if they're younger, there's a massive term block. There's a lot of opportunity in those blocks. If they're a bunch of young entrepreneurs and they're in the growth phase, or they're in the development phase of their business, like the development being startup folks. So if they're in that early phase of your business and you really, the transitions through that to getting them to the point of either transitioning succession to the practice or making a very good exit of it, all that stuff holds value to you, right? Because it fits what you're trying to do with clients. So I would pay a premium for that stuff. Like, obviously, I'm willing to pay a premium for that stuff. Let's face it, I want to buy a toonie for a loony every day of the week when I'm out buying something. But, like if I'm looking at it, that holds a lot of attraction and value to me. I can market to that and I can go from the red to the black faster and build upon what I want to build. That's worth something to me. By the way, that book, you're in competition with 50 other people on that book. Like, if that exists, that's the unicorn out there that everybody wants. There's always going to be a certain amount of the book that's going to have some ugliness to it. And that brings down the factor. And then you've got to factor in what's there. And then you've got to look at brand and reputation of the advisor too, right? And you've got to make sure that you mesh up to what they've done. So I don't know how I don't think it lessens it. I think you've got to look at it independently. Every piece of the business has to be weighed independently. And if it's a piece that you don't want, then you've got to talk about maybe buying fractions. You got to, you got to split it up and only buy the pieces that you want. Now, that may not be attractive to the guy selling it, but it is a discussion that may have to happen at some point.
Yeah, well put. You don't want to blow the deal, but you obviously want to try to negotiate and have some logic to your negotiation. So ultimately, for this advisor who's asking these questions, you know the relationship better than anyone. Next couple of questions were about technology. Advisor Flow starts at $30 a month. It integrates with Equisoft. So another question about which CRM is worth looking at. I like Equisoft because they're Canadian. And they've got a lot of automations built in for following up for policy renewals, that sort of thing. So, check out the Advocates digital catalog. If you are an Advocates member, there's a list of a bunch of tools out there, including CRMs, and figure out what works best for your business. Of course, I'm a little biased about Advisor Flow, but I think senior advisors want to capture their brain. And if they can put it into a software so that your process gets built into the future of the business you're selling to, you're kind of immortalizing yourself, which I think is kind of cool. Next question was, with it being a seller's market, what are key questions you've seen need to be asked of a seller to leapfrog the piles of potential buyers?
Just quickly to speak to that, and it kind of builds on what we said previously, and that is you want to position yourself as the buyer of choice by demonstrating to the seller that you're going to meet their objectives. And their objectives are obviously to have a smooth transition of their clients to someone who will care for them in the same way, or perhaps even better than they did. And secondly, someone who is going to be the custodian of their legacy, that's going to preserve the good reputation and value of what they've done. So the questions that you would ask them would be trying to get to the heart of what they feel about those kind of conditions. Right? What are you looking for in a successor? How would you expect your clients to be treated? What's the expectation that you think your clients have when you sell your business, and so on? How can I help you preserve the legacy that you've built?
Those are all great questions, and I think it totally depends on who you're dealing with and what matters to them. Another question came in, and I've been seeing this a lot, where MGAs or dealerships are actually buying up blocks of businesses from advisors. What would you say would be pros or cons of selling to an associate with a MGA, perhaps outside of the existing MGA, versus keeping it inside?
I'd prefer to see a facilitation from advisor to advisor, right? Like the MGA could be involved in that introduction. They might even be involved in the financing of it, but them buying it in, then you've got to say, okay, how are they going to service it, right? Like, it's one thing if you have an agreement because you've said, hey, if I pass away or I become disabled, the MGA is going to buy that business from us. So that way we at least know that the clients are going to get taken care of. But what that doesn't ask is, what does that actually mean? Like, what level of service is that? And is that what I would want for my sister-in-law who I manage her money, or my parents, or even myself who's in that block, right? So it's a slippery slope. Like, I think that MGAs do things really well. Like, we specialize very well, hopefully, in not only processing business and giving you access to all the different carriers, but also hopefully we're providing value and helping you with business building ideas. That should be our primary function, right? We're that go between and making sure you're compliant and all that fun stuff that we have to do. But it's interesting when I hear like, hey, now we're also going to be in the advisor space, right? Like, well, like, are we career agencies now? Like, what are we doing for that? Like, we should be trying to facilitate the sale of one individual's business to another individual, making that introduction, making sure that that's there. And we should know both sides of that seller, where we're saying, we highly recommend you have George, you have a conversation with Brandon, because we know where you want to go with your business, and we think this may be a very good fit for you. Not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying that's just, the landscape as I would see it.
And what about if an advisor wants to sell their block to another advisor with a different MGA? Is there any risks with that? How do MGAs look at that?
So, I can jump on that as well if you want, just because I have that perspective. Obviously, we'd like to facilitate that within the hallowed halls of the MGA, right? Because we don't want to see assets trailing off to another dealer or another book and another place. Don't get me wrong, we're protected on that as well. So on the insurance side, that they have to facilitate a block transfer. So we do get paid out from that, and we don't have the ongoing service from that. So that, from that perspective, it's fine. Obviously, though, we'd like to know if they're facilitating a sale to somewhere else, why is that, right? And if maybe that's also a lead for us as well, right? Maybe we should be talking to that individual. But I don't think an MGA should have, outside of worrying about losing that source of revenue, which we're going to lose anyways because the guy's retiring or they've passed. I think it's mostly about, at the end of the day, all of us have a responsibility to be client-centric. And at the end of the day, we should be pushing for the clients to move ahead, because ultimately that's what's best for the client. That's what's best for our industry. It's really smelly if we're going to try and put the brakes on things because we feel like we're losing a nickel between the couch cushions, right? So
we have to be client focused throughout all of these experiences, and buying books of business shouldn't be a way to get rich. It should be a way to provide a better service to the clients, and it should be a win-win for everyone involved. Okay, well, let's take one more question and then we'll wrap up. I realize we're over time, but there was some good questions here, and thank you, gentlemen, for staying over. What can a veteran insurance-focused advisor now do to increase the value of their book?
It needs to be restricted to insurance advisors. There are a number of opportunities as your client base ages. Of course, some of the insurance opportunities go away, or at least are diminished. But there are lots of other opportunities out there. And perhaps it's adding a new level of service. Perhaps it's becoming more oriented towards estate planning or distribution or philanthropy, or providing advice in other ways that go beyond recommending one policy over another. So I think it's expanding the range of services that you can offer. And the other way, of course, is the one we're already talking about, and that is to acquire books of business and make it bigger and better. Go through an integration process such as we've described. Maybe wait a year, 2 years later, having done that successfully, and then now you've got a book that has a larger revenue flow to it, will attract a higher multiple, and so on.
The only thing I would add to that is, and this will work on both sides of the business, is number one, going back. So go back and watch George's section on vision, mission, narrowing down that ideal client. And when we talk about marketing plan, you're probably, if you don't have a team and you're doing everything from taking the orders to flipping the burgers to putting the fries down and putting in the bag and sending them on their way, following up and asking how their experience was, teaming is something you should really consider, and it has to be done right. It has to be done thoughtfully, and you have to have that process in place. But defining out your business, having a marketing plan, something that actually drives leads in from specific ideal audiences, and starting to build various different things like funnels and lead magnets and stuff like that, things that actually start to track clients in through your door, increases the value of your book of business. You're going to need a CRM. These are just like table stake stuff that you have to have. Having that integration and coordination, and being a son of a father who we tried to merge our practices together, and I had to uncouple those practices because I was very process driven and he was very sales oriented. And that was not a very good recipe for Sunday night dinners. And so, really, if you're going to build a practice, build something that, number one, can be scaled, and build something that's not just attached to your name. Build something bigger than that somebody can come in and take over, and then they'd be proud to take over and run under that name. I think George mentioned, in my mind, he mentioned, and maybe it's just the way I process things because I wanted to see it that way, but, building a practice is times multiple of your recurring revenue, maybe some quite slight kick up of that. If you build a business, something that generates revenue and attracts clients to the firm, that's going to sell for multiple of EBITDA, right? And that's where you ultimately would love to be if you could be. Like a business that doesn't need you to walk through the front door and works with teams and generates revenue, and you can come in and just add more fuel to the fire rainmaking. That's an actual business, and that's highly saleable, and it is a unicorn within the Canadian marketplace.
I'd support that 100%. Do what you can to get out of the way so that the business has value without you. I mean, it's sometimes hard for the ego, but it's the best way to maximizing the value of the practice is to create one that will operate without you. So the buyer then is not worried about everybody, kind of disappearing out the door at the same time as the founder does.
I know we still got quite a few folks on the call, but just in the interest of time for our speakers who were already so generous, I do want to wrap up here. But the remainder of the questions look like they'd be very well suited for one of our next topics. It's going to be on how to build a multi-advisor practice. So stay tuned for that. And if anyone knows any of the best people in the business for that, please let me know on LinkedIn. Any final thoughts from Brent or George before we wrap up?
George, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I would just say the opportunity is certainly there, and I believe it is getting better day by day in terms of the number of books that are going to be coming on the market. Just to reiterate, be thoughtful before you jump, have a disciplined approach to it, be patient, and gone about the right way. I think that in most instances you will be able to achieve the objective of kind of leapfrogging the business ahead.
Whether you buy a custom car or you build a custom car, either way, you own a custom car. What I want to say is buying a practice is great, but it comes with issues. It's not like it's the map to the golden glory, right? So you need to make sure that is actually going to work for you. And you have to realize you could be buying someone else's problems. And that always sounds like so much fun. And so if we, the interesting thing is if we rewind this and we talk about vision and process and ideal client and stuff like that, which if we want to always weigh out is, do I buy a practice and hope it integrates correctly? Or do I spend the time and I do correct marketing and I get my mindset right and I go and build from here on in? Both carry its inherent issues, but you know what? Both can lead you to great places. And I'm as much as I'm a fan of buying and accelerating, I am a very big fan on strategy and building the practice that you want with the people that you want to actually be in business with. I think there's greatness in both. So only thing I'll say to you is, George, this was an absolute pleasure for me. I've read your stuff for many years, so I'm super fan. It's a little bit of fanboy thing. Brandon and I have become fast friends, and I love it. And for everybody that's still hanging with us, just know that, you know what, both of these gentlemen and myself included, it's all about seeing the advisory community win. And it's all about, taking the stinkiness out of our business and making sure that, what clients at the end of the day are the ones that are put forth and winning. That's what we're all here about.
Thank you, Brent. And I concur 100%.
Well, with that, thank you everyone for joining us. Hope you got some value from the session. Please respond with some feedback. We'll keep you posted on the next event, which will be likely focused on building that multi-advisory team. And couldn't agree more with these gents. The more we work together as a community, the better our businesses will be. And so let's continue to work together and integrate some good technology to make processes more seamless for our clients. Thanks, and we'll see everybody soon.
Thanks. Ciao.
See you, folks.